My family thought I was a joke. They always did. My name's Mason Hart, and if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been laughed out of a room, you'll understand what I'm about to do. This is the story of how I returned to my sister's world not as a failure, but as someone who'd been sharpening his blade in the dark. What she didn't know was that tonight would end with her on her knees, choking on the very pride she used to humiliate me. Before we continue, we share stories like this every day. If you love them, don't forget to subscribe. Kindly leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. We'd love to stay connected. Now let's get into the details of the story. Clarissa always played the part of the shining star. Honors student, valedictorian, corporate darling. At every family gathering, I was the footnote to her success. Clarissa's presenting to the board next month. Clarissa just bought her third property. Me? Mason's still doing that computer stuff, I think. I let them believe I was a flake, a dropout drifting between bad ideas. They never knew what I really did, and I made damn sure it stayed that way until tonight. My parents had written me off by the time I turned 22. He'll end up back in jail or dead, my father said during Thanksgiving one year, loud enough for the whole table to hear. I didn't argue. I just smiled, took my mashed potatoes, and kept building the empire they'd never see coming. Clarissa had always taken pleasure in watching me fail. I'd see it in her eyes, that gleam of superiority. I was the bruised knuckle of the family photo, the grainy shadow behind her spotlight. The invitation came in an envelope. That was the first red flag. No one sends paper invites anymore, unless it's for something they want to rub in your face. Join us at Bellwin Dynamics' annual Winter Gala, it read. Beneath it, in Clarissa's handwriting, thought you'd like to see how real professionals celebrate success. Drinks are free, so maybe you can finally afford something. I stared at that line for a while. Then I smiled. The gall. The perfect opening. I hadn't spoken to Clarissa in almost 3 years. The last time was at our mother's funeral. She wore white, because of course she did, and cornered me at the reception to ask if I was still fixing microwaves for a living. I left without saying a word, but I never forgot. In silence, I built something she'd never comprehend. A labyrinth of systems, patents, assets, power, none of it under my name. I didn't want recognition. I wanted control. I wanted to own the air she breathed. I showed up to the gala in a plain black suit. No tie. No designer brand screaming off my chest. I parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the way, slipping in with the caterers just after sundown. I didn't want a grand entrance. I wanted to be ignored. Overlooked. Let them think I was a temp waiter or an IT consultant. That's how they'd get comfortable. That's how they'd laugh. And then, when the moment came, I'd peel back the mask. The ballroom was a glittering, polished cage of glass and marble. People stood in tight circles, comparing bonuses and whispering names like prayers. Deloitte, Nasdaq, Series B. I kept to the edges at first, sipping soda water from a short glass, scanning the crowd. Clarissa stood near the bar, laughing too loud. She hadn't changed. Still wore ambition like perfume. Still scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. Her voice floated over the music. God, can you imagine working retail? Then her eyes met mine. Recognition was instant. Her smirk bloomed like a disease. She broke away from her group and made a beeline toward me. Well, look what the cat dragged in, she said. Did you get lost on the way to the bus station? Her friends laughed on cue. This is my brother, Mason. He, tinkers with computers or something. I smiled. I said nothing. Let the hyenas bark. Every eye that dismissed me added weight to what was coming next. I nodded politely and drifted away, weaving between groups, fading into the background again. I could feel her watching me, confused by my calm. She wanted a reaction. She expected embarrassment. But I gave her nothing. I wasn't here for a scene. I was here for a reckoning. As I stepped into the hallway behind the ballroom, I pulled out my phone and sent a single message. Ready. 1 word to 1 number. It was all that was needed to set the stage. 10 minutes later, the energy in the room shifted. Someone gasped. Heads turned. A ripple moved through the crowd like a dropped stone in water. Richard Ellery, the CEO of Bellwin Dynamics, had just walked in. Late, unannounced, looking flustered. He scanned the room like a man searching for a fire. And then he saw me. I turned slowly. He rushed over. Not to Clarissa. To me. And when he reached me, this 6-foot mogul of industry bowed slightly and said, "Ma'am." The room froze. Clarissa's glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble. Her face drained of color. The laughter stopped. The whispers rose. Richard blinked, realized his slip, and corrected himself quickly. "I mean, sir, Mr. Hart." The damage was done. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Clarissa's expression said everything. Her eyes widened in horror. Her jaw clenched. Confusion danced with fear across her face. She had no idea what was happening, but she knew one thing for certain: I was no joke. I tilted my head, studying her like a stranger. "Good to see you again, Clarissa," I said, each word slow, precise. She stepped forward, but Richard cut her off, standing between us like a bodyguard. "Mr. Hart," he said, lowering his voice, "would you prefer the executive suite or the boardroom?" I shrugged. "Whichever has less noise." He nodded and turned. I followed. Behind me, Clarissa stood paralyzed, drowning in the silence she used to weaponize against me. As we passed through the glass doors into the private elevator, I allowed myself a glance at my reflection. Same suit, same eyes, but something was different now. This was the face of a man no one saw coming. The face of the black sheep who'd grown horns in the dark. Let them keep guessing. Let them wonder who I really was. Because the truth was coming. And for Clarissa, it would burn. When we were kids, Clarissa always wore the crown. She was the golden sibling, straight A's, student council president, always in the spotlight. Our parents treated her like a prototype for greatness. Me? I was the reminder that perfection had an opposite. If she brought home a trophy, I got a lecture. If she won a medal, I got grounded. They didn't raise 2 children. They raised one queen and her foil. It took me years to understand that some families build cages out of comparisons. Clarissa didn't just thrive under pressure, she weaponized it. She knew early on that being better wasn't enough. She had to be the only one who mattered. I remember coming home with a science fair ribbon once, 2nd place. I was proud. Clarissa looked at it, smiled sweetly, and said, "Almost." She made it sound like failure. Our parents laughed. I stopped entering competitions after that. Every time I tried to shine, she found a way to dim the light. It all came to a head in high school. I was 17 and finally getting serious about college. My grades had picked up. I'd built a portfolio in computer science, apps, algorithms, things that got attention. I landed a scholarship interview with a prestigious tech institute. Full ride, if I impressed them. Clarissa found out the night before. The next day, during the interview, they brought up my juvenile record, something sealed, something that shouldn't have surfaced. They had copies. Anonymous delivery. One guess who sent them. I confronted her that night. She didn't deny it. She just said they deserve to know what kind of person they're investing in. I'd been caught stealing hardware at 13. Stupid mistake, long buried. She unearthed it to kill my future. Our parents didn't scold her. They said she was looking out for the family name. That was the night I decided I was done being the shadow. I packed a duffel bag, emptied my savings, and left before sunrise. No note. No goodbye. I spent 2 years off-grid, working out of coffee shops, shelters, public libraries. I learned everything I could about networks, encryption, systems that governments barely understood. I hacked for food at first, nothing big. Then I got better. Cleaner. I started building my own tools. The kind that didn't leave fingerprints. A darknet encryption engine. A trace elimination protocol. A firewall that responded like a living thing. Word spread. By 22, I was writing code for people who didn't sign checks. They wired you money from ghost accounts in Liechtenstein. The name Mason Hart disappeared. I created aliases, LLCs, front stacked like Russian dolls. I didn't want fame. I wanted power. Quiet, untouchable power. Shell corporations across Delaware, the Cayman Islands, Singapore. I wasn't chasing money. I was burying it. Every cent made me harder to find. And while tech startups chased VC funding and press releases, I built quietly, methodically. My tools were used by counterterrorism units, border control, and even corporations that never knew they were licensing from the same man Clarissa used to call a waste. Years passed. I didn't look back until I saw her name again. It was an article in a corporate magazine. Clarissa Hart named executive director at Bellwin Dynamics. She smiled from the page like she'd won something. Bellwin was massive. Defense contracts, aerospace security, cutting-edge AI. And she was climbing it like a ladder made for her feet. Most people would have scrolled past. I stared at that headline for a long time. Not out of anger, but calculation. There it was, the stage I needed. I started watching Bellwin from the shadows. Public records, investor meetings, internal memos, everything I could scrape without leaving a trail. I studied its board, its vulnerabilities, its gaps in infrastructure. Clarissa was spearheading digital modernization. She didn't even know her own systems were bleeding through cracks she couldn't see. I began quietly buying stock. First through proxies, then holding companies. No one paid attention. Why would they? The names weren't mine, but the control was. It took 2 years to secure 60% of Class A voting shares. No one knew. Not the board. Not the press. Certainly not Clarissa. As far as the world knew, I was still off the grid, a ghost. And I liked it that way. Because ghosts don't knock when they come for you. They pass through the walls and lock the doors behind them. I didn't want her ruined by scandal. I wanted her trapped in a tower of her own making, slowly realizing it was built on quicksand. And that the only hand reaching out was mine. I watched her from a distance, month after month. At galas. At conferences. Always talking, always performing. She'd built a fortress of ego, never suspecting that every promotion, every department shift, had been quietly greenlit by a signature she never saw mine. I wasn't just buying her company. I was steering her life. Moving pieces she thought she controlled. Letting her rise just enough to believe she was untouchable. Because the higher she climbed, the harder the fall. Revenge, for me, wasn't rage. It was math. Precise. Slow. Beautiful. And now, the equation was nearly complete. All it needed was a spark. Something public. Something humiliating. That's when the gala invitation came, her handwriting, her condescension, her fatal mistake. It was perfect. She thought she was inviting the family embarrassment to grovel at her feet. What she really did was roll out a carpet for the man who'd been writing her fate in code and contracts for years. She just didn't know it yet. I didn't respond to the invite. I didn't need to. I booked my flight under a corporate pseudonym and arrived 2 days early. I met with Ellery, Bellwin's CEO, behind closed doors. Told him who I was. Showed him the documentation. Watched the blood drain from his face. He'd thought I was a ghost too. Until the ghost came knocking with legal control over his entire board. "What do you want?" he asked. I told him, "Nothing. Just stand back and let it happen." He agreed. Of course he did. Men like Ellery don't fight storms. They board up windows and pray the wind spares them. I gave him the time, the place, the script. All he had to do was walk in at the right moment and address me correctly. That was it. A single word, delivered with reverence, in front of the right people. One word to break her world apart. Everything else was already set in motion. Clarissa had climbed her tower. All I had to do was kick the ladder. The room was packed with ambition. Laughter clinked against champagne flutes, echoing off marble columns and polished wood. Everyone at Bellwin Dynamics dressed like they were auditioning for a Fortune cover story. The air reeked of power, sprayed over insecurity. I moved along the edges, unnoticed. That was the point. I wore no name tag, no flashy cufflinks, just a clean suit and silence. The kind of silence that gets underestimated. I watched the executives parade their titles like medals. It was almost charming how fragile they were beneath it. Clarissa stood center stage in a ruby dress, surrounded by sycophants orbiting like satellites. She was in her element, one hand clutching a cocktail, the other gesturing with theatrical flourish. Her laugh carried, sharp, controlled, artificial. When she saw me, it took less than 2 seconds for the smirk to appear. That reflex never changed. Her eyes flicked over me like a scanner searching for weak points. I gave her none, just a nod. She made her way over with a predator's grace, drink still in hand. "Well, if it isn't the dropout," she said, loud enough for everyone within 10 feet to hear. "What brings you here, Mason? Finally figured out how to tie a tie?" I smiled, pretending I hadn't heard that line from her since I was 15. The crowd chuckled. A few looked at me like I was someone's awkward cousin. Clarissa turned to them with mock sincerity. "This is my brother. He's unusual." I think he works at a vape shop now. Isn't that right, Mason? More laughter. I didn't flinch. They always needed to feel smarter, didn't they? Needed someone beneath them to elevate their own egos. I took a slow sip of my drink, nodded politely, and said, still tinkering with computers, actually. She rolled her eyes and turned away, dismissing me with her shoulder like I was a stain she'd learned to ignore. The bait was in. The room had seen me labeled, boxed, shelved. Just another family embarrassment trotted out for the holidays. They didn't know they'd just shaken hands with their future. I drifted through the crowd again, ignored by choice. A ghost, present but unseen. That's how I liked it. I listened, tracked conversations, watched how Clarissa held court. Her words dripped with calculated charm. She made subtle jabs about interns, bragged about her influence in budget meetings, exaggerated a client acquisition she had nothing to do with. I wasn't here to correct her. I was here to watch her build the pedestal she'd soon be pushed from. Brick by brick, smile by smile, glass by glass. An assistant appeared beside me with a whispered message. Mr. Hart, the CEO has arrived. Right on time. I nodded, handed off my empty glass, and walked to the far side of the ballroom. It took less than 30 seconds for the ripple to start. First the door creaked open. Then came the hush. Richard Ellery strode in, looking flushed, out of breath, and overdressed for the hour. He scanned the room like someone searching for the source of a fire alarm. And then his eyes locked on mine. He crossed the floor fast, faster than a CEO should. People turned to watch, confused. Clarissa's conversation trailed off mid-sentence. She followed his gaze and froze. Richard reached me, paused, then bowed his head slightly. Ma'am, he said. One word. A whisper, but it struck like a thunderclap. Silence swallowed the room. Someone near the bar dropped a fork. I didn't respond. I let the moment hang like smoke. Clarissa's face went white, her eyes wide and searching, as if the floor had just shifted beneath her heels. Richard blinked, stammered, and corrected himself. I mean, sir. Mr. Hart. Too late. The damage had bloomed like blood in water. I turned slowly to Clarissa. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her hands clenched around her clutch. Her mouth parted, then closed again. For the first time in her life, she had no script. No rehearsed line. Just me. And a 1,000-yard stare from a man she thought was beneath her. The crowd looked from her to me and back again, waiting for an explanation. I gave none. Good evening, Richard, I said, casually. Glad you could make it. He nodded stiffly, clearly unsure if he should be deferential or apologetic. I turned toward the stunned audience. I was hoping we could find somewhere quieter. Perhaps the boardroom? Richard agreed instantly. Of course. Right this way. He moved, and the crowd parted like a wound splitting open. I walked behind him, past Clarissa, past her frozen colleagues, through the shattered illusion they all shared. The walls cracked silently. The ceiling lowered with every step. Clarissa didn't follow. She didn't move. She looked like someone just told her the ending of a story she thought she was writing. Her lips were pressed tight, but her eyes were betraying her. There was fear in them now. Not confusion, fear. Because only someone who's spent their life climbing knows what the wind feels like when it starts to change. She hadn't just misjudged me. She'd mocked me publicly, believing I couldn't touch her world. And now, that same world was bowing at my feet. I could feel the crowd's whispers behind me as the boardroom door closed. The quiet inside was colder, heavier. Richard pulled out a chair for me like a nervous intern. Would you like anything? He asked. I waved it off. Let them talk for a bit. Let it marinate. He nodded, pale and fidgeting. I leaned back, exhaled slowly, and thought of all the times I was laughed at. All the nights I ate ramen on a bathroom floor coding through tears. This was for every single one. I stayed in that boardroom for 10 minutes, just long enough for the panic to metastasize. Clarissa would be spinning now, desperate to piece together what just happened. She'd call people. They wouldn't answer. She'd demand explanations. They'd stammer. And soon, she'd realize that everything she built was held up by strings I'd been pulling for years. This wasn't just revenge. It was revelation. And it was only beginning. The gala was over. The reckoning had begun. Richard stood stiffly at the head of the boardroom, beads of sweat gathering at his temple. The man had faced senators, auditors, in billion-dollar deals without flinching, but now he couldn't meet my eyes. I let the silence stretch. He tried again, cautiously. "Ma'am." I raised a hand. "It's Mr. Hart now, if you please." His jaw tensed. Of course, Mr. Hart. Behind the glass, the party buzzed with questions. Clarissa stood in the center like a statue carved from shock. The queen was bleeding beneath her smile. Richard turned toward the frosted glass doors, his voice faltering. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, just for a moment." The room began to quiet again, pockets of whispering shrinking into nothing. Clarissa didn't move. Her eyes were locked on me, unblinking. Not with confusion now, but dread. "I'd like to introduce someone very important to Bellwin Dynamics," Richard continued. "Some of you know him as Clarissa Hart's brother. But in truth, he's far more than that." He swallowed hard, then said it. "This is Mason Hart, the majority shareholder of Bellwin Dynamics. He currently owns 60% of our Class A voting stock." The words hit the room like a car crash. People gasped. A woman dropped her drink. Clarissa's hand shot out to grip the back of a chair. She didn't speak. Couldn't. Her lips were slightly parted, her chest rising too fast. She looked around like she'd walked into a nightmare. But no one was waking up. Because this was real. I stepped forward slowly, letting them take in the truth. "For years, I've stayed anonymous," I said. Deliberately. "But I've always believed that timing is everything. And tonight felt appropriate." I picked up a nearby glass. Someone had left it behind, and raised it. "To masks," I said. And the moment they slip. No one laughed. Not a single soul moved. The air had become glue. Clarissa looked like she wanted to scream, but she couldn't even breathe. She'd spent her life pulling strings. Now she was the puppet. "Since I'm no longer a ghost," I continued, "let's take a moment to talk about transparency, particularly in leadership." I reached into my coat and pulled out a small black envelope. Inside this are internal memos, emails, communications Clarissa believed she had deleted from the Bellwin system. Turns out, digital footprints are tricky. I handed it to Richard. He opened it, scanning the top sheet. His face tightened. "This is real." I nodded. Backdated commissions, side deals, manipulated hiring metrics. All traced, all time-stamped. I turned back to the crowd. "Clarissa has been manipulating intern selection to push out applicants from certain schools, less prestigious ones. She's restructured incentive programs to funnel bonuses to executives in her circle while freezing growth for others. She's even siphoned tech development grants into a private account under a shell name, Caro Consults. A name that doesn't exist, except in wire transfer logs and insider Slack threads she thought were scrubbed." I let the words settle like dust. People started backing away from her. Clarissa shook her head, barely audible. "You can't. This isn't," her voice cracked. "You forged. Everything in that envelope," I said, cutting her off, "is verifiable. Pulled directly from Bellwin's own servers." I nodded at the door. Right then, it opened. In walked Samantha Green, head of HR, and Lionel Cash, Bellwin's general counsel. Both had been summoned 2 days prior. Samantha approached the mic Richard had abandoned. "Ms. Hart," she said flatly, "you are hereby suspended pending a full internal investigation. Please surrender your badge and credentials." Clarissa looked around wildly, waiting for someone, anyone, to step in. But the crowd stepped back instead. Her allies vanished. Her entourage dissolved. Her voice shrank to a whisper. "This is insane. This is my company." I walked closer, lowered my voice to a razor's whisper. "No, Clarissa. This was never your company. It was your stage. And tonight, the curtain fell." She opened her mouth to speak, then stopped. Her breath hitched. Her hands trembled. She took a step back, but the wall caught her. Samantha extended her hand. "Your badge, Miss Hart." Clarissa reached for her clutch, almost mechanically, and removed the sleek silver ID card. Her fingers held it a second too long. Then, finally, she let go. The silence that followed wasn't pity. It wasn't shock. It was something colder, detachment. The kind people give to someone falling from a height, when they realize there's no catching them. And still, she looked at me, her eyes pleading now. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this?" I leaned in, my words soft but sharp. "Because you don't get to walk through life carving scars into people and expect no one to notice. You tried to erase me, so I erased your illusion. She stared at me, trembling. The predator had become the prey, cornered and gasping. I turned and walked away, my steps steady, deliberate. I didn't need to see her fall apart. That wasn't the point. The point was that she now knew what it felt like to be powerless. Richard trailed behind me nervously. Should we call a press release? A statement. I stopped and looked at him. No, I said. Let the silence speak for itself. It'll be louder that way. He nodded, almost relieved. I could see he was grateful I wasn't here to gut the company. Just her. That's what made it worse. Because she knew, deep down, I could have buried the whole building. But I didn't. I chose precision. The scalpel, not the sledgehammer. I let her live with the wreckage. Back in the hallway, I paused to look out over the ballroom again. The music had stopped. The chatter was gone. People whispered in pairs. A few glanced nervously toward the exit. One man stepped forward to shake my hand, unsure if he should. I ignored it. Clarissa stood alone now, badge gone, lips trembling, mascara cracking at the edges. She looked smaller, thinner, like the architecture of her confidence had finally collapsed. For the first time in her life, she wasn't being watched in admiration, but in caution. I left without saying another word. There was no victory speech, no dramatic bow, just a man walking out of a building he now owned, leaving behind a room full of masks, finally stripped. And in the center, a woman who thought power meant immunity, realizing it had only ever meant visibility. I didn't look back, because I didn't need to. I already knew the image would haunt her every night. Clarissa was crying, not the kind that drew sympathy. There was nothing innocent in it. Her makeup streaked down her cheeks, her voice trembling in front of the remaining staff. Please, Mason, we can fix this. Just talk to me. Her words spilled out, desperate, cracked. I didn't stop. I walked past her slowly, deliberately, like she was a memory I'd finally scraped from my skin. Every eye followed me, not hers. She had no more stage, no more spotlight, just the sound of her own ruin, echoing through silence. She tried to follow me, but Samantha and 2 security personnel blocked her path. Clarissa, please cooperate, one of them said. I didn't need to see her anymore. I'd seen enough. She had been untouchable for so long that the fall felt like justice wearing a crown. I stepped into the elevator and let the doors shut without turning around. Behind me, her begging voice thinned into a whisper. That was the last time I ever heard her speak, and I didn't regret it for a second. As the elevator descended, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver lighter I'd carried for years. A gift from someone who should have been there tonight, someone she helped bury in silence. His name was Caleb, my best friend, my brother in every way that mattered. We built our futures side by side, writing code and dreaming of something bigger. He had the talent, the drive, the kindness. But when it came time to apply to Bellwin's college pipeline internship, he never even got the interview. Clarissa had seen his application on our family computer. She mocked it that night over dinner, said he wasn't Bellwin material. A week later, he got a rejection, followed by an anonymous tip to the admissions board about a disciplinary report that didn't exist. Clarissa never admitted it, but I knew. She destroyed him with a sentence. He called me the night he got the news. Said it felt like the air had been pulled from his lungs. A month later, he took a walk into traffic and never came back. That was the moment I stopped believing in fairness. That was the day I realized monsters didn't wear masks. They wore promotions, high heels, tailored suits. They smiled while they crushed you. Clarissa's cruelty had always been a game to her. But Caleb's death gave me clarity. Revenge wasn't about fire or chaos. It was about silence, strategy, precision. I made a vow over his casket that I would never let her wear her crown without the weight of what she'd done. And tonight, I made good on that promise. When I stepped out of the elevator, the lobby was almost empty. One intern looked up from her phone, her eyes wide with confusion. I nodded once and moved through the revolving glass doors into the cold night. The air smelled like winter and smoke and endings. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Again and again. Texts, calls, media alerts. News was already leaking. Bellwin shareholder revealed. Internal investigation launched. Suspended executive. I ignored them all. Let the world run after the headlines. I was done chasing ghosts. I crossed the street without looking back. The building stood tall behind me, all glass and steel and secrets. I knew the rooftop would be empty. No one ever used it, except for the cleaning crew or the occasional smoker. I climbed the stairwell and pushed through the door. Wind hit me in the face. The city stretched in every direction, blinking and buzzing like a giant circuit board. From up here, it looked like a map I already owned. And tonight, I finally felt that truth. I lit the cigarette slowly, the flames steady even in the wind. I didn't smoke often, but this was a ritual. One last burn for the dead, the betrayed, the forgotten. I took a drag and exhaled into the sky. Below me, somewhere, Clarissa would be packing her things in a box. Maybe she'd be escorted out. Maybe she'd try to spin it. But the story had already shifted. She was no longer the star. She was the stain. And stains don't come out, no matter how hard you scrub. I stood at the edge, not to jump, never that. I stood to feel the air, the altitude, the silence. There was something sacred in being above it all. I'd been underground for years, unseen, unheard. Tonight, I wasn't just visible, I was undeniable. And not because I forced it. Because I earned it, built it, controlled it. I didn't take Clarissa's world from her. I revealed what she'd done to it. I didn't ruin her life. I uncovered the ruin she'd buried under charm and lipstick. My phone buzzed again. I didn't look at it. Let the headlines scream. Let the executives scramble. The damage was done. The reckoning complete. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like a failure. I didn't feel like the black sheep. I felt free. Not because I'd won, but because I'd kept my word. For Caleb. For the boy I used to be. For the silence that almost swallowed me whole. Revenge isn't about noise. It's about silence that chokes. Silence that echoes. The cigarette burned down to the filter. I crushed it beneath my shoe and leaned against the rooftop railing, arms crossed. Down below, cars drifted like blood cells through glowing veins. Somewhere in those streets were people who'd mocked me, dismissed me, laughed at me. And none of them had seen this coming. I smiled. Not out of joy, but finality. I whispered the truth aloud to no one and everyone. They never saw me coming, I said. Now they'll never forget. And then I walked away. And that's how I turned humiliation into power and made the woman who tried to bury me watch her empire crumble. If you found this story gripping, make sure to subscribe for more dark, real-life revenge stories that prove silence hits harder than screams. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in my place? And if you've ever been underestimated, this channel's for you. New stories drop every day. Until then, stay sharp. See you soon in the next story.